Hi friends, welcome back to another video with Mountain Tribe Homestead. My name's Amberly. If you followed me for a little while on either Instagram or here on YouTube, you will have come to learn that I have been trying to put together a perfect bread recipe that meets the needs and preferences of our family. It's a sandwich bread recipe. So I have been working on this for the past few months, and I have finally gotten to a point to where it has come out just the way we all would like our sandwich bread to be in our family. So this is going to be a video on a tutorial for that recipe. It is a sandwich bread recipe. So what I'm doing here is I am keeping myself busy while in my KitchenAid stand mixer, the little teal stand mixer back there, I have already put together 2 3/4 cups of warm water, 2.5 tablespoons of active dry yeast, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. And I have mixed that up in the KitchenAid mixer and let it set. And so while it was setting and blooming and getting bubbly, I was working on that other recipe, just keeping myself busy while I was waiting. And so that image that you just saw is exactly what you want it to look like before you move to the next step. So in the stand mixer, I start off with my whisk attachment. If you don't have a KitchenAid stand mixer, that's fine. You can use a hand mixer, or you can use just a whisk, and that'll do the job just fine. So once you've reached that point and you put the whisk attachment on, you're going to add 1/4 cup of honey, 2.5 teaspoons of salt, and 1/4 cup of oil. I start off with the 1/4 cup of oil in my little measuring cup first, because then when I put the 1/4 cup of honey in the measuring cup, the oil that's left in the measuring cup makes it easier for the honey to slide out of it. And so we just added that in the bowl with the yeast mixture and mixed it all up with the whisk attachment. And then once it's thoroughly mixed, I continue by adding flour. So when I add my flour, I'm only going to add 1 cup at a time, and I'm going to let that mix in. I still have the whisk attachment on my mixer, and I'm only going to add in a few cups of flour and get it very well incorporated in the mixture. And then after the 3rd cup of flour, after that 3rd cup of flour is completely mixed in, I'm going to take the stand mixer and I'm going to turn it off and lower the bowl, and I'm going to switch it out, and I'm going to take that whisk attachment off, and I'm going to put the dough hook on. Before I get the mixer going again, I'm going to make sure the entire sides of the bowl is completely scraped down so that there's nothing that the whisk attachment missed or the dough hook is not going to get a hold of and mix in there. So I'm lifting the bowl up after I've got this dough hook on there, and then I'm going to add another cup of flour. And with the dough hook, I just turn this on the lowest speed for a little bit, and I'm getting each cup of flour incorporated into the mixture at a time. I'm not going to add it all in at once, because the amount of flour that gets used in this recipe can vary depending on a few different factors. So I only add 1 cup at a time so that I can really eyeball it and make sure that it's getting to the consistency that I want it to get at. Once I reach 5 cups of flour that I've added to this recipe, I then lower my increments from 1 cup to 1/2 cups. And I'm only going to continue adding any more flour past the 5 cups by 1/2 cup increments. So, and every time I add it, I try to scrape the bowl down as well. So far in this recipe, I have added 5 cups. And so I've got that last 5th cup in there, and I am just going to let that dough hook really knead that dough and get it mixed in there before I add any more flour. So this is what it's looking at like right now with 5 cups of flour. And this is not how I want it to look, but I am going to just have it go for a little bit longer before I add any more flour to make sure that it is really well incorporated. And while that is going for probably about 4 minutes, I'm going to go back to my other recipe that I was working on, which is my refrigerator dough. And in past videos, I have talked all about this refrigerator dough and all of the uses that I use it for. It's an amazing go-to recipe if you're busy and you want to be able to pull dough out that's ready for you straight out of the fridge and make whatever you want with it. It's very versatile. So I will link the link down below that will take you to the recipe for this dough. This is not my recipe that I'm using for this refrigerator dough. This is from Homesteading Family, and I've been using it for a few years now. And I don't make it every week, but I do make it pretty frequently, at least every few weeks. So I got all that dough mixed in there, and while I'm doing that, I'm able to stand next to my mixer and watch what it looks like. And so as you can see, I've kind of stopped what I'm doing, and I've reached over to the KitchenAid and turned it off, and I started scraping the sides down because I don't want this dough that gets stuck up on the side of the bowl. I don't want that dough to get forgotten about when it's getting mixed and kneaded together. So I'm just making it a point to scrape the sides of the bowl down every now and then. So I just did that, and then I went back to my mixing of my dough, of the refrigerator dough, and I'm just adding a bunch of flour to my refrigerator dough, and I just incorporated this in there to kind of just give you an idea of how long it took me to make the dough for the bread and what I did while I was waiting. So you can see I could see that dough was ready for another half cup. It was really well incorporated, and so I kind of stopped what I was doing, and I have my 5-gallon bucket on the floor with flour, so that's why I keep reaching down there. And so I just added another half cup in there. So now we're at 5.5 cups of flour added into this recipe. Now last time I made this, I stopped at 5.5 cups and that dough was ready. But on this particular day, this dough is not ready. You can see that it's not forming a smooth ball. It's still really sticky, and it's really not coming together as one whole piece. And you'll see in a little bit how much of a difference it makes being able to see when it's ready and when it's not ready. This dough right now in the video is not ready. So I am going to let this knead for a little while, and that is something that I kind of have been doing differently, and I've been playing around with my recipes, is kneading my dough a little bit longer than I usually do. And that, I think, really plays a big part in the texture of the sandwich bread, the type of texture we were looking for. And so here, a little while later, you can see that it's really starting to come together as a ball. It's not quite ready yet. I pinched it because when you pinch the dough, you're able to tell the texture of the dough. And when you pinch it, it should feel kind of like you're pinching your earlobe, and it shouldn't stick to your fingers so much. It will be a little sticky, but you can tell, if you look right now, you can tell that it's definitely coming together and more, the dough staying together. It's not sticking all over the bowl like it was a little bit ago. And every time I stop it, the dough kind of falls down and it melts. And then every few minutes I'll stop it and check it. And you can see that it's not sticking to my fingers as much. But when I let go of that dough, the dough sinks back down into itself. And you'll see here in a second what I mean when I'm talking about pinching the dough and being able to tell when it's ready. So it is almost there. And so I'm going to let it just do its thing for a few more minutes. I did add in another half a cup that I forgot to record. So this recipe, I did 6 cups of flour. But you can see here, do you see how it is sticking to my fingers, but it's not stretching apart as easily. And so that's what you want to look for. So it's really, really close to being done. So I am going to let it's over there kneading for a little bit, and I'm going to check on this other dough, and this refrigerator dough really rose up a lot. So here it is, and I'm going to show you when the hook stops, you can see it melt off of the hook. It melts off, like, see it? It melts off that hook. And then I'm going to pinch it, and it's going to stick to my fingers a little bit, but I'm not going to be able to stretch it apart with my fingers. And also, something else to look for, when you pinch it, see how I'm pinching it and it's staying up in that pinched up shape. It's not sinking back down into itself. I really hope I'm making sense. It's really hard to describe how something feels and what it's supposed to do when it comes to bread dough, but I'm trying to show you here how I pinch it up and it kind of stays up in that peak. And that's what I personally was looking for. That's what I want when I'm making my sandwich bread. And the way that I got that was I just made sure I let it knead. The dough got kneaded some extra time than a typical sandwich bread dough recipe will tell you. So it's at that point now where I was looking for. It melted off of the hook. It felt like an earlobe when I pinched it. And then when I pinched it up into a peak, it stayed up in the peak, and the bread was sticky to my fingers, but when I pulled my fingers apart, the dough didn't stretch apart on my fingers. So it met it checked all the boxes. So I'm washing my hands off, and I'm going to go ahead and wash off my stand mixer, because if I walk away from it before I do that, it's not going to happen, and I'll go to use it the next time and I'll totally see that I forgot to go back and wipe it down. So I go ahead and I take care of this right away before I even walk away. So a lot of recipes and people will tell you that you need to take your dough and you need to take and get another bowl, and you need to oil that new bowl that's nice and clean and put your dough in it and roll your dough around in this new, fresh, clean, oily bowl. Well, I'm a super busy mom, and sometimes I do cut corners when it comes to saving dishes here and there, and over the years, anytime I've made bread dough, I have learned the less dishes I have to wash, the easier it makes my job. So I kind of cut corners with this, and I'll show you here. I leave it in the bowl that I mixed it in. And what I do is I will pour some oil on top of I have the oil, I just poured it right on top of that dough there. And I'm going to take that oil and I'm just going to rub it all around the bowl. And then I'm going to flip the ball of dough around, and I'm just going to roll it around in that dough. And I'm going to make sure that the oil covers the whole bottom of the bowl, and it covers the whole sides of the ball of dough. And this just prevents it from sticking to the bowl too much, so that when you go to pull it out and separate it to shape it into the loaves for your loaf pans, it's easier and you're not handling the dough too much. So while I was messing with the ball of bread dough, I turned around, I covered it up, and I turned around and put the bowl on my stove to rise. And I saw that the refrigerator dough that I was waiting to rise, it exploded out of the container, down the sides of the container. I have never had this happen. I am not sure what I did differently, if I maybe counted wrong with the yeast or what. I don't know what I did, but that was really entertaining for my youngest to see that. So the ball of dough, when you're waiting for it to rise, it's going to take a different amount of time based off of how warm your kitchen is. If it's really warm, it's going to rise really quickly. If it's really cold, it's going to take a while. But you're going to want it to double in size, and then you're going to want to punch it down. If your kitchen is not really warm, you can put it in the oven. Don't turn your oven on, but just turn the pilot light in your oven on, and that's going to keep it warm enough in there where it will help your dough rise. On this day, my kitchen was very, very warm, so I didn't need to do anything but just set it on my counter. And then another way that I kind of cut corners with keeping minimizing the mess in my kitchen and not having to clean so much is I just cut the dough with my bowl scraper directly in the bowl. I cut the dough in half and then I shape it up in the air without having to put it down on the counter. And I just kind of tuck the ends down into itself, and I turn it to the side and tuck the ends into itself again. And sometimes I do it a couple times depending on how tight the dough feels, but I want to have that dough pretty tight feeling, and so that the top of it is very nice and smooth. If you do it this way, you may come out with two different sized loaves because it's harder to eyeball how even you're cutting your dough in half. And I'm not a perfectionist, so if one loaf is a little bit bigger than the other, it's not a big deal to me. So you shape the dough and then you're going to let it rise again. And the dough rose for about 30 minutes in the loaf pans. So the first time it doubled in size, it took about an hour in my kitchen. It could take more if your kitchen is cold. And then to get to this size above my loaf pans, you would like to have the dough rise either at level with the top of your pan or a little above it, because it's probably going to rise up a little bit more as it's cooking in the oven. And so once it's risen up to where you want it at the top of the loaf pans or a little higher, you're going to stick them in the oven. And you're going to stick them in the oven at 350 for about 30 minutes. And you're going to note that they're done by the way it sounds. If you tap on the top of the loaf of bread, it's going to sound like it's hollow. And that's how you know it's done. If it's not sounding like it's hollow, then just put it in there for a few more minutes and check back at it again. And then right after these loaves of bread are pulled out of the oven, I immediately paint on melted butter. And I brush the tops, completely saturate them in melted butter. And this really just gives the bread a wonderful butter flavor when you're eating it on the top, and it really makes the top of the bread a lot softer as well. Because when you pull it out of the oven, they're real hard and crunchy on the outside, the crust is. But painting this butter on there immediately after, the crust will soak that butter in and it'll just add an extra layer of delicious flavor and soften the crust. This butter gives it the perfect texture for my 7-year-old because she is not a fan of any type of crust on her bread. But if it is soft crust, she will eat it. So this really does the job. Okay, so once it is all covered in melted butter, I let the loaves cool in the bread pans for at least 5 minutes. Once they've cooled, it's usually between 5 and 7 minutes. And once they've cooled between 5 and 7 minutes, I remove them from the pans and I put them on a cooling rack. And I absolutely do not cut my sandwich bread that I'm going to be using for the entire week before it's 100% cooled off. If it's still warm when I cut it, it will create it to be a bit crumbly and it will not hold its texture and shape as easily. So I just put it on the little cooling rack and I just leave it on the counter in the kitchen. And then once it's 100% cooled off, I will slice into it. And so this is what it looks like when I slice into it. And you can see that there are two different sized loaves because I wasn't being a perfectionist when I was cutting that ball of dough in half. And so that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. But there's the inside of it, and it's the perfect sandwich bread texture. It's extra soft. It has the honey butter flavor, which is exactly what my family loves when it comes to sandwich bread. We love having that outside texture of the crust nice and soft, and the inside needs to be strong and sturdy so that you can spread peanut butter or jam on your bread and not fall apart. But it also needs to be soft enough to where you're not having to feel like you're ripping off a chunk of beef jerky type bread. So if that makes sense, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's extra spongy and it holds its shape well, so it's soft and fluffy but also strong for a sandwich bread. And this just is so perfect for our family. We love it. So it's a honey butter sandwich bread, and it makes 2 loaves, and I just slice the loaves up and I put it in a bread bag, and I keep it and store it in the fridge. So there you go. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time, friends. Bye.